now is what photographers call the magic hour. I've just spotted another great shot. Going to try and put together a series of stitched images. I'm hoping for a really exciting shot. That's exactly what we want. I've got 2 lights set up and we've got this lovely wooden line. The exposure range is just too great. Hi, I'm Karl Taylor and welcome to this review of the fantastic 5D Mark III against the 5D Mark II. I've just purchased 2 5D Mark IIIs to replace my EOS 1DS Mark III and my current 5D Mark II. Why did I make that purchase and what are the benefits of the 5D Mark III over the 5D Mark II? Well, first of all, before we get into all this pixel peeping nonsense, let me just point out I'm only really interested in the image quality. Is the image quality better than the previous model? And to prove that, what we're going to do is a real world test. Behind me, you'll see a still life setup that we've got prepared. And we're going to put the 5D Mark II against the 5D Mark III, exactly the same lens, exactly the same settings, apertures, run through all the ISOs to show you the key differences between these two cameras in stills mode and in movies mode, and to show you exactly why I made the decision to buy the 5D Mark III to get rid of my other cameras. Now, the 2 models that you see in front of me both have the battery grip on. I really like working with the battery grip. I can't work with these cameras without the battery grip. It allows me to shoot in the portrait vertical position and have the shutter release button and have all the functionality of the control toggle stick here, everything there as well, and the autofocus push as well. So the battery grip you can see is on that 5D Mark III and also on the 5D Mark II. Now I'm going to go over some of the changes between the 2 models. Some of them are not what I consider important at all, but I'll mention them. Some of them are more so important. So let's have a look at the first one. The 5D Mark III is a 23 megapixel camera. The 5D Mark II is a 22 megapixel. So you've got a 1 megapixel increase, nothing particularly important there. Not going to make a great deal of difference. The processors in the 5D Mark III are what's called Digic 5 Plus. They were Digic 4s in the Mark II. This basically processes the image information more quickly, more accurately, things like noise reduction, all that sort of stuff. So that should give you an improvement in image quality. The metering, light metering, the camera's ability to measure how much light. Well, in the old one, it was a 35 zone metering system, and in this new one, it's a 63 zone metering system. The partial metering accuracy has been reduced, so it's down to 6.2%, and the spot metering is down to a 1.5% area. All a bit of nonsense, to be honest, because I just use a light meter to get me in the ballpark. I'm shooting in manual mode or one of the priority modes, and I just use the light meter to get me in the ballpark, and then I refer to the histogram and the information on the LCD screen to tell me whether the metering is on. So I'm not really too fussed about those metering improvements, but hey, if they give more accurate metering, so be it. The viewfinder. Apparently this one gave a 98% view of the actual image area. This one now gives 100%. Neither there nor here really. Flash sync, still 200th of a second flash sync. Now, it's worth noting that on the 1DX, which is the top model, the flash sync speed is 1/250th of a second, which I think is a great factor. It's a shame that isn't on the 5D Mark III, but hey, it's half the price of the 1DX, so you can't expect it to be the same spec as the 1DX. Interestingly, it is almost the same spec as the 1DX in every other aspect, except for the flash sync speed and the motor drive speed, the amount of frames per second it can shoot. So for wildlife photographers and motorsport photographers, that sort of thing, the 1DX may be a better option. Also, the build quality of the 1DX is superior, it's more solid, the weather sealing's better. However, in saying that, this is a very solid camera. It actually feels a little bit more solid than the 5D Mark II felt. So I think they have made some improvements there, and I believe they may have made some improvements on the weather sealing as well. So this still feels like a very robust professional level camera, and bear in mind that you can buy 2 of these with the battery grip on for the same price as a 1DX. And that's the choice I made, so that I can shoot with 2 cameras with 2 different lenses on and have them ready to go at all times, rather than spend the money on 2 1DXs instead. Focusing. 5D Mark II had a 9-point focus system. This one, the new one's got a 61-point focus system. Well, it seems like a bit of an overkill to me, a little bit of added nonsense to have all these extra focus points in there. I was quite happy with the 9-point focus system in this one. It seemed to work pretty well. Thought that that would be fine. But the reality is that whilst this has got the 61-point focus system and lots of adjustments you can make to the focus system within the menu, I actually used this camera the other day on a photojournalistic project where there was lots of people, lots of motion, lots of activity. And this thing was actually really bang on. The focusing was super quick and super accurate, and it actually focused where I wanted it to almost without me having to tell it, without me having to tell it which focus point. And even better than that is when I examined the images in Lightroom and looked at them critically, the focus point position, or where it focused on the image, was pin sharp. It seemed to be more accurate in its focus than the previous 5D Mark II. So that does seem like a positive improvement. The main improvements for me, the things that I think are important, are things like the LCD screen on the back. We've got a new LCD screen. It's bigger and it is sharper. It's got more pixels and it's a larger LCD screen than the previous model on the 5D Mark II. So that should be an improvement. And from my tests so far, it has actually resolved a better image on the back of the LCD screen. The color looks better, and overall it just looks sharper. So for reviewing your images and checking them and looking at exposure and checking the histogram and all that sort of information, that for me is quite a relevant improvement. Frames per second. The amount of pictures this thing can take in a second of shooting with your finger locked down on the button. On the 5D Mark II we had 4 frames per second. And on the Mark III, we now have 6 frames per second, okay? So that is a worthwhile improvement. If you're into sports photography, wildlife photography, that sort of thing, having those extra frames per second is great news. It's not as fast as the 1DX. The 1DX can shoot 14 frames per second. So as I said, for those professionals that are really focusing on wildlife photography or sports photography, or where you need that rapid frame count, then the 1DX is going to be a better choice for you. The movie recording modes on this are much improved in that they've got a new compression type. There's 2 new compression types that give supposedly a better quality image. Now, does it give a better quality image in real world terms? Well, I filmed in daylight conditions and I put the 2 images side by side and I couldn't really tell the difference, but we do see considerable difference in low light work, which I'm going to come to in a little while. The other important aspect for filmmakers is that there is a new firmware update coming soon, which allows you to record HDMI directly out of the camera into an external recorder with no compression, 422 8-bit. So that is going to be good news for film enthusiasts who want to use this camera. We know that the 5D Mark II broke the mold, if you like, and gave some incredible filming abilities to independent filmmakers. This has expanded on that and goes even further with some improvements in that area as well. We've also seen the ability to shoot 60 frames per second in the film mode in 1280 HD. We didn't have any slow motion capability on the 5D Mark II. We had it on the 7D. Now they've introduced the same format of the 60 frames per second at 1280 on the 5D Mark III, which is good. And we've also got a headphone monitor now and better sound recording on the 5D Mark III, which is always problems that were noted with the 5D Mark II. Now, the most important aspect, the key thing here, the image quality and what this camera can do for me that this one can, and that is ISO. It is the ability for the camera to shoot in lower light situations and shoot those pictures without noise, without additional noise, without too much grain. And that is where we're seeing a marked improvement in this model compared to the last model. And keep in mind that this model was absolutely superb for low light capability. People raved about its low light capability. Well, Canon have upped the game. They've gone one step further with the low light capability of this camera. Not only is the ISO range greater, but the capability of the ISO equivalent like for like is much, much improved on this camera. And we're going to see that in the real world tests that we're going to do, the like for like that you're going to see coming up. But just to let you know, on the previous model, the ISO range could go from 100 up to, what was it, 25,600 in the expanded mode. On this one, it can go in the expanded mode from 50 ISO up to 102,400. Now, that is incredible. Whether it's that usable at 102,400, I don't think so, but it's certainly usable at the 25,600, and the 12,800 is probably where you're going to max it out, push it to the limit. But certainly at ISO speeds of 6,400, this is actually a very capable camera. Anyway, like I said, enough of that pixel peeping nonsense. Step over here and let's take a look at this setup. We are going to do a real world test with this 5D Mark III, this is my other one, on this 70-200 lens. This 70-200 lens is fixed on this tripod. It's not going to move, and we're going to swap the body with the 5D Mark III with the 5D Mark II, and we're going to run through a series of various ISO speeds and exposure times. We're going to do some exposure tests with flash, we're going to do some exposure tests with continuous light, and we're going to do some low light movie recording tests, even under candlelight, and we're going to bring all those results up on screen for you to see side by side so you can really see how this thing performs. Okay, all of the following images were processed in Lightroom with the noise reduction filter applied, general normal sharpening and color balance corrections. All of the settings that were applied were the same on both cameras. Here with the ISO 100, there's no difference between the two shots. Even at 800 ISO, these are the shots with flash. You can zoom in, still no real noticeable difference at this point. Moving up to 3200 ISO, and we do start to see more grain in the Mark II than the Mark III. So here it seems that the Mark III has got about a one-stop advantage at that particular setting. At 6400 ISO, now we can see again noticeable difference in the Mark III, less grain, less noise. 12,800 ISO. The Mark III, the image is much better, but now at this stage, I wouldn't really consider that a usable image. This is now under tungsten light, and look at the difference in the highlight tones on the orange and the coloration. The color tones look better and the highlights are controlled much better. 800 ISO, quarter of a second at f16. Still not a great deal of difference in the grain and noise, but the highlight tones are better. 3200 ISO, 15th of a second under tungsten light, better grain structure, better color, better highlight control. 6400 ISO under tungsten light. Again, we're seeing about a stop advantage with the Mark III over the Mark II. 12,800, I don't really consider this a usable image, certainly not for still life. This would be okay for journalistic or reportage. 25,600, you can see the Mark II is just completely useless here. And again, the Mark III, a grainy image, but a massive improvement on the other one. Okay, this I did as a benchmark base standard 400 ISO, 6 seconds. So we're on a longer exposure where you'd expect to see more noise. And the image is noticeably better on the Mark III. Okay, onto the video. At 400 ISO,
No real noticeable difference between the Mark III and the Mark II. 800 ISO, we do see a little bit of difference. The grain is much more reduced and much more smooth, but we're only going to zoom in on this one at 1600 ISO because this is really where you will start to see the difference. So if you look closely, you'll see the image on the right is clearer and cleaner and less noise. At 3200 ISO, and this is quite spectacular for video, the image on the right much more usable than the image on the left. 6400 ISO now, and that image on the left is full of noise and the image on the right is still usable. 12,800 ISO, still holding in there the Mark III for video, completely gone on the image on the Mark II.
F20, 25,600, that's nuts! Right, this is 30th of a second at f5 with nothing but 3 candles in pitch darkness, 25,600 ISO. This is 12,800 ISO, 30th of a second, f4.5 with nothing but 3 small candles for illumination in an otherwise pitch black room.
So overall, dramatic improvements with the Mark III over the Mark II on video mode, and I'd say a one-stop gain improvement on stills. So a very capable camera, and with what looks like better colour rendition and highlight control.
Right now is what photographers call the magic hour. I've just spotted another great shot. Going to try and put together a series of stitched images. I'm hoping for a really exciting shot. That's exactly what we want. I've got 2 lights set up and we've got this lovely wooden line. The exposure range is just too great.